Year-round grazing has not only improved the health of our land, our grasslands and our cropland, but our financial health as well as our mental health and our stress. Being able to accept that, hey, just because I'm not out here running a tractor 24 hours a day doesn't mean that this still isn't the best way to raise livestock. Now we're seeing a significant cost savings every month with how much we're not having to feed the cattle because they're doing the job out on the cornfield and the cover crop fields themselves. Definitely improved all aspects of our operation. The biggest regret I have was not jumping on this sooner. So several decades ago, my dad did some grazing of cattle on corn stalks, and he was switching over to no-till back 30 years ago. And so unfortunately, there was a weather event in the late fall, early winter that ended up wrecking the field in a way with the cattle trampling out there when it was too wet. And so that was a drawback, obviously, when you're trying to stay no-till. And so I had finally convinced him back in 2013 that, hey, we need to try this again, but there's ways you can do it where you don't damage the cropland. And so just like, other discussions when you're talking generational differences and young people coming back into the farm trying new ideas, you have to compromise. And so we made the compromise that it would only be when the ground is froze so that we didn't have any issues with destroying the cropland when it was wet. And so back in 2014 we put them back on some cropland with corn stalks, and then there's been periods here over the last 8 years now where it's either been corn stalks and cover crop residue following a small grain, cereal grain forage in the spring. So we've had cattle on the cropland every year now for the last at least 8 years, and the last two winters, winter of 20 and 21 here in South Dakota, it's been open. We haven't really had much snow, and so they've been grazing the entire winter on corn stalks or cover crops, and so it's a great cost savings for us, but it's a great way for the cattle to be out on the land doing what they should be doing instead of confined in a feedlot with us having to feed them all winter long. Yeah, the year-round grazing has changed the variety of species we've had in the pastures, and in it to the good. And it's because of the rotational grazing that we've employed. It's allowed different species to show up at different times of year. And by varying the times of year when we have the cattle out there in certain paddocks, so we never go back to the same paddock the same time of year. We try and mix it up so that they can take advantage of those different warm season and cool season grasses. It's improved the overall health of our rangeland, and it's improved the quality of the grass, the health of the cattle. And then by running them through some of the crop aftermath, they're actually healthier during the winter, and I think we saw that their coat is much more clean and sheen. The cattle are happier and content to be grazing out on the land because that's what they're supposed to do. As far as a cow, vet costs, I know that we don't have near as many that seem to be getting sick during the season. And they seem pretty healthy, and I think that's just the product of rotationally grazing them into fresh pastures. Mother Nature kind of takes care of itself there, and so when they're not overgrazing areas and the stress on the animal is significantly lower when they're healthier, that we don't have those costs that can pop up and all of a sudden you're cutting into your profit significantly. And then you go to the cost savings, we're not having to grow as much feed, produce as much feed to stockpile because we're actually letting the cattle do the work out in the field. We're probably saving this year around $8,000-9,000 a month by not having to feed the cattle. That's a significant benefit to the bottom line, but also then we're not going through near as much diesel fuel and equipment, maintenance as well, because we're not running that stuff near as much. And so we have less hours, less diesel fuel, less time that we're spending. To go back to the health of the land, year-round grazing definitely fits in for us on our cropland because we've seen it in our fertility results when we take our soil samples in the fall going to the next year's crop, that we're not having to apply near as much fertilizer on the fields where we've grazed. And that's one of the main goals of doing that, is to cut down on your commercial fertilizers. So I think we've got a ways to go yet to get, to where we want to be, but it's definitely a step in the right direction and something that our kids are learning from as well. And so it's a financial boost to your bottom line, but then also it gives you more flexibility as a family, that that you don't have to be doing chores all day, every day, and you have some flexibility to spend more time with your family. And it reduces the stress on yourself and your other family members, because you know that the cattle are out there doing their thing, and it's just a more peaceful, I guess, lifestyle that we've noticed. And it's I'm glad we made the change back in the day, and obviously there's things that we can continue to do better. So much of it is just a change in your mindset, and because of your goals have changed. Being able to accept that, hey, just because I'm not out here running a tractor 24 hours a day doesn't mean that this still isn't the best way to raise livestock. There are ways that you can raise healthy livestock without having to run equipment every day, and letting them be a cow, letting them do their thing out on the land and not have to worry about them being underfed or underhealthy. You just manage the acres and read the cattle. They'll tell you when they're hungry. We've showed up this winter occasionally when it's been 10 to 20 below zero and supplemented them with a few bales, but they don't come running to us like they're starving. They're like, oh, okay, I suppose I'll eat now. And we give them, usually it's a bale of alfalfa or some grass, just to get them through those really cold snaps here. So they've got enough energy to keep the furnace going so they don't get too cold. And you can tell that they're not really looking for you, but they're happy that you're there. And yeah, we spend 20 minutes a day feeding the calves, and we can go about our day doing other things. And so it's accepting that just because you're not working every day doesn't mean that it's still not a great way to raise livestock. I would say talk to people that are doing it and see if maybe you can take a couple things away to your operation that might help you take that first step. Obviously you don't want to jump all in right at once, because it's a mindset change, and you have to be comfortable with the changes you're making and not stress yourself out to the point that you're going to hurt your mental health in that fashion. So I think the biggest thing is just try and learn. There's a lot of resources out there that a person can gain some knowledge from. Talk to people that have done it, and try and keep an open mind, and maybe you can incorporate just one of those ideas that you come away with, and then the next year maybe it'll be another step. So just keep an open mind would probably be the biggest advice, and find people that are doing it, because other ranchers, we've made the mistakes and we've learned from the mistakes, and so the stories that we'll share are there to help, so that you don't make the same mistake again. There's people that have been grazing either cropland for years, and so we knew it could be done. It was just managing it so we didn't have to do any tillage, because that was the end line right there. We were not going to cross that path and have to actually go out in the field and do some tillage to fix the field. So it was talking to the right people and doing enough reading on the media and resources that you have, that yes, you can do it. It's just managing when they're out there. So it was a good compromise, and it worked out well for us. And now we're seeing a significant cost savings every month with how much we're not having to feed the cattle, because they're doing the job out on the cornfield and the cover crop fields themselves. I think it just takes a little more time, if you're going to do year-round grazing, to sit down and have a plan of rotating them through certain pastures during the summer, not overgrazing, so that you can get some regrowth and possibly come back later in the season if you get the correct amount of rainfall. But also having a plan for your winter grazing as well, whether that's crop residue or having some cover crop fields. So you've got an idea of where you're going ahead of time, but have the ability to be flexible in case Mother Nature throws you a curveball, which she usually does. But be be ready to move them when you need to so that they don't hurt your cropland if they're out there grazing, but you can go back when the time is right. And in our case, we always have some feed around for if it snows and when it snows, so that if we do have to pull them off the fields and supplement feed them, that we've got that feed source. It's our insurance policy, if you will, to get through the winter. We don't expect to graze all winter long because we expect to get snow that eventually is too deep for the cattle to graze through. So it's having, the flexibility to have different plans and know that, be ready to call an audible when Mother Nature says, hey, I'm going to dump a foot of snow on you, and we can have the cattle in the right location at the right time and still be, successful with them. In years like this where you don't have any snow, you take advantage of it and you graze as long as you can. So we pulled the cattle in the spring of 21 on March 8th from the cropland. So we grazed all winter long. And obviously that was really beneficial to not have to feed hardly any hay. And we've done that same thing again this year. They'll probably be out there, it's the end of February now and we still don't have any snow. But typically, if we can graze till Christmas, that's my goal up here. And after that is kind of the cherry on top. Yeah, we've always put up hay. It's just changed now where we do it and how much. And so several years ago, we quit haying some of our hay ground and actually, because it had fence around it, and I'd rather have the cattle graze there. I've come to the conclusion that I don't want to remove the grass hay from the landscape if we can graze it, because it's healthier and that it helps pump more carbon into the soil. And so we're producing forage in different ways through oats and barley or alfalfa on some of our crop ground that we can then follow with cover crops in the case of some of those small cereals and help replenish the organic matter that we're removing from the landscape there, but try and keep the cattle grazing the grass instead of always removing it. Obviously Mother Nature dictates how much you can do this, but if we had more cattle, we would obviously graze more acres, but we are stocked for the grass acres that we have. And so I'm not one that wants to overstock and then have to destock in the drought situations. And so I'm content with our herd numbers. And if we end up having more grass production than we can handle, well, that just means there's that much left on the pastures that will be healthier for those acres going into next year as well. We changed our calving strategy. We pushed it back a little bit later in the spring, so our cow herd doesn't really start until about the 20th of April. I don't know if it's so much a year-on grazing response as more of just avoiding Mother Nature's wrath the beginning of April in South Dakota. We've had several blizzards, and we're not in the business of selling bulls, and so why are we fighting Mother Nature so hard to raise a calf that's born 2 weeks earlier when you get to the end of April and typically it's 50, 60 degrees, green grass, and if the mama cow can have a calf out on the landscape, she's much happier, much more content and healthier than if we have to run everybody through the barn. Yes, it gives us flexibility in the spring to then, we've got some rye that we fly on our corn in the fall, and that'll come up in the spring, and so we can move our pairs through that rye field in the spring before pasture turnout, and it gives us the flexibility to let the grass develop a little more in the pastures and helps our cropland as well, because then obviously the cattle are out there fertilizing, and then we can still follow that up with soybeans typically the end of May. And so it's a win-win for not only the crop side but the livestock side of the business.